She was teasing him relentlessly as he picked out his clothes. It was non-stop, and while it was humorous and done in fun, he was on the verge of losing it when she landed on his shirt. He looked at her, the equivalent of a dragon's grin on her face, and then she cocked her head, coughed. "Ray, are you ill?" I feel something, Raynick said before coughing again. "I'll get someone." Ray? He said, confused. He said, "No, Jay, you. I need you. I think I'm ready." "Ready? For fire, Jay. I think I'm ready to breathe fire," she said, and he looked at her in awe. It was too soon. She should take another couple of moons based on what Tyrion had told him. "Dracarys," he said, and then had to move quickly as his shirt was enveloped in flames. He grabbed the jug that was filled with water he kept on his table and emptied it over the burning shirt, looking at it, and the chair he'd left it on there was nothing left of it, and the chair's top had almost been burned away. He walked over to her and lifted her in his arms, feeling her shaking a little. He could see the worry in her face and wondered why she felt that way. "Ray, I'm sorry, Jay, I couldn't control it," she said sadly. "You will, though, Ray. This is amazing. You shouldn't be able to do this yet, and certainly not a flame that big. We'll practice, and you can cook your own food now, too," he said happily, and thankfully she relaxed. "I never liked that shirt anyway. You should wear your red one," she said then, with both a serious and half-joking tone. "As my sister's commands," he said with a mock bow. "You brother are an idiot," she said as she flew to her chest. Jon in the end took her advice and wore the red shirt. As he looked in the looking glass, he knew he could pass both for someone paying homage to the Lannisters with black and crimson, or for what he was, a dragon. He walked down to Joy's room to read her story a little earlier than usual, as he'd be at the dinner with Marjorie and her family for most of the night. He found her already in bed, and he thanked Alessia for doing as he asked. Sitting down by the bed, he found he wanted to tell her a story of dragons, but instead told her a far happier version of the story of Arya, where the princess got her wish to travel back to the home she loved so much. As he left the room, he found himself contemplating the fate they'd subjected the girl to, hiding her away when all she wanted was to be free. He walked to Sansa's room to find her already dressed, the two wolf pups looking on as she sang a little song while checking her hair. "Really singing, can't you see what you're doing to the wolves, little sister?" Jon said as she stood up and hit him softly on the chest. "Thang loves my singing, don't you, girl?" she said, leaning down to rub her wolf's back. "Did you get the extra food and water?" he asked. And she nodded, pointing to the corner where the wolves' meals were lined out. Jon knelt down to look at the black pup, telling him he'd be back soon and that Ghost would return. The black wolf looked at him, and Jon rubbed his hand over its neck, feeling it as it leaned into him. "Well, shall we, little sister? You look very pretty, by the way," he said softly as he took her arm. "I do, don't I?" she said, giggling. "Well then, my handsome brother." "You may escort me to dinner," she said. And he rolled his eyes, making her laugh as they left the room. They met Loras on the way, and Jon couldn't help but snigger, no matter how elaborate he dressed. Loras was always able to outdo him, his friend's taste being a little more refined than his own. "Jon, Sansa, you look very beautiful tonight," Loras said, and he saw his sister blush. "We do, don't we?" he said. And Loras just chuckled. "Come, let's not keep my family waiting too long. My grandmother will not be pleased," Loras said, and they took the lift to the guest wing. Loras took them straight into the small room the Tyrells used for dining. Lord Mace and Lady Allery greeted them warmly, and he saw Lady Olenna smirk at his outfit. Marjorie was wearing a dress in her house colors and wore a red and black ribbon in her hair. He found he could barely keep his eyes from it or her for most of the night. Garland and Lady Leonette, while polite and friendly, seemed far more interested in each other than them, and he found he couldn't fault them for it. Marjorie's cousins sat around the table, Eleanor and Mega he knew, but there were others he did not, though all seemed friendly enough. He was grateful that the meal wasn't too extravagant. He had heard that Lord Mace was fond of elaborate dishes to show of his wealth, and while he had no issue with it, he preferred simpler fare. "Is your shoulder feeling better, John?" Lady Allery asked. "It is some, my lady. I still can't spar, though, which is frustrating," he said, and Garland looked at him. "That's a shame, John. I was looking forward to a rematch." "As was I, my lord. Another time, perhaps," he said. And Garland nodded. "Are you looking forward to coming to the Reach, Lady Sansa?" Leonette asked. "Very much so, my lady. To see Highgarden is something I've been hoping for a long time," his sister said a little nervously, and he smiled at her, seeing her perk up when she saw his face. "Sansa and I are going to have so much fun together, aren't we, Sansa?" Marjorie said, and he saw his sister's smile almost burst from her face as she nodded happily. "Those ships of yours, John, incredible things. I'd not thought such a thing possible until we sailed on them. Never have I had such a comfortable journey at sea," Mace said, smiling at him. "And I just designed them, my lord. It was Lord Tyrion and Lord Kevin who saw to their building," he said, and Olenna decided then to speak up. "Indeed, though without the design, they'd not have had the idea. I wonder what great idea you'll come up with next, John," she said, looking at him. "Ice," Loras said, turning everyone's eyes to him. "Ice?" Marjorie asked, her eyebrow raised. "Aye, ice. Tell them, John," Loras said, looking at him, and had he been nearer, he'd have kicked him under the table, giving the grin he was giving him. "John?" Marjorie asked. "Aye, ice. It can be used in drinks to keep them cool, or it can be used to allow food be stored for longer without going bad and allow it to travel further." "Wouldn't it just melt?" Mace asked, looking at him. "No, my lord. There are ways to keep it cool, ways to make it so you can transport and store it. We hope to begin the first stages of it in the next few moons," he said, and Marjorie's smile made him feel 10 feet tall. The rest of the dinner flew by. Sansa seemed to make new friends in Eleanor and Mega, both of them telling her of the balls held at Highgarden and the last joust they were at, which was won by Sir Baelor, who was apparently the handsomest knight in the land. Loras told Garland he'd been doing some new training regimes, which then led to him being teased about losing to Brienne, before Garland actually told him he had done very well in the tourney. John had tried his best not to be too obvious in talking to Marjorie. He'd been polite and spoken to everyone, but had probably spoken to her twice as much as the others combined. With dinner over with, he said his goodbyes, and was surprised when he, Loras, and Sansa were left alone with Marjorie and her cousins. Garland had asked him where he should take Leonette before they left on the morrow, and John had suggested the second tower and told him how to get there, finding Marjorie look at him as he did so. Sansa and Loras were speaking to Eleanor, Mega, and the other girls who we found out were called Alla and Leona. "Did you have fun tonight?" "Just Marjorie?" he asked. And she smiled back at him. "I did. Just John." "Oh, looks like we're about to have a song," she said, turning as Alla came back in the room, carrying a small wood harp. They sat down in the chairs while the girl, who was no older than Sansa, began to play a nice tune and then began to sing. "Ali's son." The girl had a wonderful voice and sang the song really well. He looked to Sansa, who was both wiping her eyes and clapping her hands. When the girl was finished, he joined in and watched as Alla blushed at the praise she got. "John, will you sing next?" "Please, John," Sansa said, looking to him. "Yes. Just John. I believe you owe me a song, too," Marjorie said with her lopsided grin, telling him she'd not let this up. "John sings?" Eleanor asked. "Do you play too?" Alla asked, and he knew then he was not getting out of this. He nodded as he took the harp in his hand and wondered what song to play. Should he play one of the known ones, or one he'd found amongst his father's letters? In the end, he chose that one instead and began to play softly. "You'll remember me when the west wind moves upon the fields of barley. You'll forget the sun in his jealous sky. As we walk in fields of gold, so she took her love for to gaze a while. Upon the fields of barley in his arms she fell as her hair came down. Among the fields of gold, will you stay with me? Will you be my love? Among the fields of barley. We'll forget the sun in his jealous sky. As we lie in fields of gold, see the west wind move like a lover, so upon the fields of barley, feel her body rise when you kiss her mouth. And there have been some that I've broken, but I swear in the days still left. We'll walk in fields of gold, we'll walk in fields. Finishing the song, he looked to see Sansa smiling at him, Eleanor and Mega looking at him oddly, while Alla had a huge smile on her face. Loras just nodded to him, and then he looked to see Marjorie wiping a small tear before smiling beamingly at him. That was wonderful, Jon. Did you write that? I've not heard that before. Alla said, and Jon just replied that it was an old song he'd come across. After saying goodbye to the girls and after promising Alla that when he came to Highgarden they'd sing together, Loras, Sansa, Marjorie, and he walked to the lift. Before they got there, Marjorie whispered to him to speak to her for a moment, and so he looked to Loras, who walked on ahead. That song was beautiful, Jon. Where did you learn it? I found it among my father's things. I think he wrote it for my mother, he said, and she smiled at him. Thank you for singing it for me, she said, and he noticed her blush a little. I promised you didn't. I just, Marjorie, he said, smiling at her. You did. Just Jon, she said as they turned to walk to the others. Tyrion. Reading through Rhaegar's letters felt like both an invasion of his privacy and a glimpse into an incredible mind. The letters covered many different subjects, from plans for the future, to songs, to musing on his family, to declarations of his love for Lyanna Stark. There were some he felt Jon needed to know immediately, some which offered insights into his mother and father and their feelings for each other and their plans for the future. What he found most surprising, though, was that some of these letters being sent to Maester Aemon made no sense. Why send the man a love letter he'd written for Jon's mother or a song he'd written about her? As he read more, he came to the realization that Rhaegar may have been sending these to Aemon for Jon, and that chilled him to the bone. He refused to pull at that thread of thought alone, so instead concentrated on the other things the letters covered. When he got to the sections that spoke of the Maesters, he was stunned. Wally's journal gave details on the man's own thoughts and feelings. Rhaegar's letters, though, gave a clearer line into the reality that the Maesters were plotting against them, and that as king he meant to act against them. Reading a particular passage regarding his thoughts on Pycelle made Tyrion grab one of the letters about Jon's mother. Oh, by the gods, he said as he dropped them both down on the table. He turned and almost fell over when he saw him there, the black cat staring at him. Ever since the dragon had been born and the wolves arrived, Balerion hadn't bothered him. He'd barely bothered anyone, to be more precise, other than the incident with Oberyn. Seeing him there, Tyrion wondered what brought him back, but was then surprised when the cat walked to him and licked his hand. Before turning and almost disappearing from his sight, he moved that quickly. Unnerved, he decided to take a walk. Needing to clear his head both from what he'd read and from the encounter with the demon cat, he strolled down to the kitchen and grabbed some cold meat and cheese. He wasn't especially hungry, but he needed to eat something, he felt. After eating, he walked to the library and took a seat. Just sitting there made him feel so much better. How much time passed before he returned to his rooms he couldn't tell, but he felt renewed and so began to read again. It was light outside when he finished, and what he found he needed to tell Jaime and Jenna, perhaps Lady Olenna too. But most of all, Jon needed to know, and he worried how the boy would react. He climbed into bed and assumed sleep would be hard to come by, but he did get to rest for a few hours. Upon waking, he washed and dressed and went to break his fast, even though when he arrived it was almost time for lunch. He ate alone and was grateful for it. Jon and Loras were with Brienne getting lessons from Arthur, though Jon would be watching, not participating. Sansa was with Joy and Marjorie at lessons. the Tyrell girl having asked to join even though she was more advanced than his cousin or John's sister. He smiled when Sarah told him this all without asking. The young girl loved to gossip, but only to him. As for Jamie, well, he and Daisy were otherwise engaged, and he smirked at that, his brother's afternoon trysts becoming well known in the Rock. "There you are, nephew." He heard the dulcet tones of his aunt as she waked towards him. "Were you looking for me?" "I was." "Where have you been?" "I know John gave you that journal, but you're Castellan here, are you not? And with your brother off, doing what it is he does," she said, shaking her head, though she was smirking. "We need someone to be Lord of Casterly Rock." "I'm sorry, Aunt. The book, the journal, we need to speak on it, all of us," he said, and she looked at him, the rebuke she had on the tip of her tongue gone for now. "What did you find? Is it bad?" she asked, seeing the worried look on his face. "It's not good, Aunt. John may take it quite badly," he said softly. "Perhaps we need not tell him?" she asked, and he could sense her own worry for the boy. "No, this he needs to know. I'll send for him and for Jamie. We'll meet once you're done here." "Why don't you go get Jamie yourself, Aunt?" he said teasingly. "Huh? The last thing I need is to hear the noises which come from that room. I may send Emmon, though it may be enough to end him," she said, and they both laughed. An hour later, he sat in Jamie's solar, trying not to smirk at Jamie's flushed face and Daisy's almost annoyed look. Jenna arrived a few minutes later, and then they waited for John. "Are you not going to tell us what this is about?" Daisy asked, her tone one of annoyance. "I will, Daisy, when John gets here. Trust me. I'd not have disturbed you had it not been important," he said, and saw her sigh before nodding. John arrived a few minutes later, a small grin on his face when he entered. "I think Brienne's in love with Arthur," he said, japing. "John?" Daisy asked, confused. "Nee." He pointed out a couple of things with her stance and showed her where she was going, wrong with her swing, and she's now listening to everything he says as if it's the word of the gods themselves, he said. And Daisy laughed. "John, I asked you here because of what I found in the journal and in your father's letters. What you said your uncle suggested about the Maesters and about others, it seems to be backed up here, John, both in Wally's journal and your father's letters." "The Maesters. What did they do, Tyrion?" John asked angrily. He told him then of Whaley's, and of how he seemed to be eager for the North and South to be joined, of what he really thought of the Starks. Seeing how annoyed he was getting, he left out what he had written about his mother. The other things he'd tell him would upset him enough for now. When he got to the part about his grandmother, John looked at him, and Tyrion felt his fury from where he sat. "Are you saying he killed my grandmother? That the Maesters killed my grandmother?" he asked, his voice surprisingly calm. "I'm saying he didn't do anything to save her, John. Not that he actually killed her." "It's the same damn thing, Tyrion. Letting her die is the same as if he killed her himself. As if they killed her themselves." John said, his voice rising. "John," Jenna said, and he watched as John took a deep breath and nodded to her. "I'm sorry, my lord, what else?" he said, calm again a moment later. "With Wally's nothing but John. I think Pycelle may have went further. Your father's letters suggest that he believed, that he thought that Pycelle may have been responsible for there only being 3 Targaryen children born to your grandmother," Tyrion said. And Daisy and Jenna gasped. "I don't understand," John said, looking to Jamie first and then Jenna and Daisy. "Your grandmother had a number of miscarriages. John, babes not brought to life more than most women have," Jamie said. "You're saying that Pycelle did something to my grandmother to stop her having children. Rhaella had difficulties with being with child. It caused a lot of problems with Aerys. There were also some babes who died not long after being born, Daeron and Aegon and Jaehaerys," Jamie said. and Tyrion saw Jon looking at him. "You think he did something to the babes?" Jon said softly. "I think it could be Jon, but I don't know. Babes sometimes don't make it. It doesn't always have to be because someone did something," Tyrion said, trying to make him feel a bit better. 3 babes. How many others weren't born, Jaime?" Jon asked. "Rhaella was with child 7 or 8 times, I think," Jaime said. "That's too many. Far too many," Jenna said, moving over to place an arm around Jon's shoulder. "What else, Tyrion?" "Tyrion?" Jon said, looking at him, his expression leaving no room for silence. "I think your father ended up distrusting them so much that he refused to have one near your mother. With Ilya, he brought her to Dragonstone for both your brother and sister's birth. So he trusted that maester, but I think with your mother..." "Enough, Tyrion, enough," Jenna said loudly, feeling Jon slumping against her. "We'll talk about this later, Jon. Jon, come with me," she said far more softly to Jon before leaving the room with him. "I felt he needed to know," Tyrion said once they were gone, his voice dejected. "You were right, he did. Jon's resilient, Tyrion. It's better he knows of this now than in pieces later. What else did you find? There's more, isn't there?" Jaime said, and he nodded. Rhaegar knew of the plots against him. Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully were both involved, though I think it was Jon Arryn who was the architect. Father was almost involved too, but you ruined that. "I did how?" "Lysa Tully. Had you been married to her, it would have been all of us against them as it was. It didn't matter since Father sat the rebellion out." "Wait, let me get this right. You're saying the Maesters, Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully, they were all in on it together, all of them against the Targaryens?" Daisy asked disbelievingly. "Yes and no. The Maesters wanted rid of the Targaryens, but I don't think for the same reasons Jon Arryn and Hoster did. I think they worked to the same goals, but for different reasons." Chera. Tyrion said. "They worked together, though?" Jaime asked. "I don't know. I don't think so. I think if they did then, they did so unknowingly. 2 separate groups, both aiming for the same thing." "Which was?" Daisy asked. "The fall of dragons." Jenna. She walked with Jon to his room. She could see he was torn between screaming and ranting and raving or breaking down in tears, and whichever he chose, she'd be there for him. They were just at the door when Walder came walking towards them, the Black Wolf pub running ahead of him. She looked to see the worried expression on his face, but Jon just nodded at him and Walder relaxed. Jon moved free from her arm around his shoulder and stepped in front of her. Upon seeing him, the Black Wolf slowed, and she marveled at how quick it did so. She watched as Jon rubbed his hand on the wolf's back and then knelt down and hugged the wolf before stepping back up and opening his door. He looked to her and smiled, and she walked inside with him, taking it as an invitation to do so. She was met with chirping from the dragon, and then Jon reached over to take it in his arms. He sat down on the bed, the black pup waking beside Jon before laying down in front of him, and he motioned for her to sit beside him, which she did. "Ray, what you hear, please don't react to it. We'll speak on it later, I promise," Jon said, and the dragon chirped back before flying to the table to stare at them both. "Jon," she asked, waiting for him to speak, "we need to make sure that all the maesters are checked. We have to be certain about them. I think I have a way to know about Kralin, but we need to be sure. They're too important to how we do things. We need to stop that. We need them to be less important until we know they can be trusted." "Jon, once we know who they are, we can deal with them. I don't know if we can wait until I'm king." I think we need to deal with them before then. I need to speak to Richard. We need to get someone into the Citadel. Find someone there we can trust. John. Pycelle for sure is one of them. I think Lewin is on our side. He's different. This Maester at Dragonstone, the one who birthed Ray and Egg him too. We should try and contact him. He may be able to help. John, she said. And he looked at her before he broke down and cried as she took him in her arms. Why, Jenna? Why would they? My grandmother was she so terrible, just because she wished for her sons and daughter to be raised in the north. My other grandmother, her children, my uncles, my aunts, my family. Why do they hate us so? He said as he sobbed. They are small, petty men, John, and we will make sure they pay. I swear it, we will. Swear it, we will. She held him as the dragon watched before she began to chirp loudly. John moved from her and walked over to the dragon. Fire and blood, he said determinedly to Rhaenys, and she chirped again, almost in the same tone. Jenna thought. He turned back to her, and then walked over, putting his arms around her and holding her tight. She found herself brushing his hair softly with her fingers, just as she did with Walder or Tion when they were upset. Thank you. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For not leaving me alone with this. Your family, John. You'll never be alone again, she said, and he smiled. She stayed with him a few more minutes until there was a knock on the door, and she got up to open it, seeing Lady Marjorie there. Inviting the girl inside, she looked to John, who nodded to her, and then turned to walk back to Jaime's solar stopping, to talk to Walder first. Don't let him leave alone, she said, turning to Walder. I won't, my lady. Where is yours? He's training with Arthur. I'll send someone for them both. I want you all around him tonight, understand? Aye, my lady. She nodded and walked down to Jaime's solar entering to see Tyrion still speaking to Jaime and Daisy. How is he? Tyrion asked. Better for now. We need to stop telling him things like that. It's too much, Tyrion. Jaime, he's still a boy. We can't hit him with revelations like that, she said, looking at both her nephews. He needed to know, Aunt, Jaime said, defending his brother. Aye, he did, but maybe we need to know first. Maybe we need to discuss how we're going to tell him things. Right now, he's down there thinking the world hates him, hates who he is, what he is. They hate him so bad they conspired to kill off his family. Have you any idea how that feels? She said, looking to them both while Daisy nodded in agreement. No, Tyrion said. Exactly. So from now on, we discuss it first. I'm not against him knowing just how it's done. Now tell me the rest of it. What she heard made her furious. John was right. They needed to get to the bottom of this, and soon. This couldn't be allowed to continue. It was far too dangerous. Should anyone find out about John, they wouldn't even see them coming. When are Geryon and Oberyn back? Oberyn will be back in a day or two. Geryon is staying on in Castamere. Why? Jaime asked. They need to be told about this, Olenna, too. But I'll handle that. We need to plan this out. All of us. And John. John especially. He needs to be the one to decide, she said. And Jaime and Tyrion nodded in agreement. What about Crelin? Jaime asked. John said he may be able to find out about him. Until he does, we send nothing through him. If any of us are unwell, we get second and third opinions. She said, and they agreed. She turned to head out to speak to Olenna. No one knew retribution as well as she, and right now she felt in dire need of a rant about what would be done to those gray rats. Oberyn. Traveling back to Lannisport was a much different experience to traveling from it. He had been excited, eager, almost desperate to finally get his hands on the mountain, to finally avenge Elia. But since he'd killed him, he'd been in a far more quiet and contemplative mood. He had almost lost everything in one moment. As he looked to his daughters, the thoughts, not only that he would have left them without a father, That he have left Elaria and their girls alone filled his mind. But the thoughts were far worse than that. He'd have left them alone at the mercy of the mountain. He knew what saved him. He saw it in the mountain's eyes when he raised the sword, saw it briefly in the white wolf's eyes as he looked at him. How the boy had done it he did not know. That he was a warg was surprising enough, but being able to warg a man he'd not heard of such a thing even during his time at the Citadel. He looked to the white wolf who was watching them silently. A dire wolf alone was an incredible sight, but even among dire wolves there was something about Ghost that marked him different. "Father," Tyene said, carrying him over some cooked meat. "I thank you, daughter," he said, taking the plate. "You are not celebrating, father?" "I find I've no appetite for it. Tyene, go get your sisters and Damon. We must talk. Send the guards away," he said, and she jumped up to fetch her sisters. He looked to the wolf, who seemed to understand, and he watched it as it moved to stand halfway between him and their guards, almost creating a barrier of some sorts. Tyene arrived back with her sisters and Damon. A moment later, he was glad to see they were happy at least. Since the mountain's fall, they'd been in an almost constant state of joy. Waiting until they all sat down, he chewed the meat and took a swallow of the wine Jerian had given them when they left Castamere, the Lannister lion having been pleased to see them return safe and well. "There are things I need to tell you, things which may seem strange, but I need you to listen and understand," he said, and his daughters nodded. "Damon, as you say, my prince." He told them then of Jon and Rhaenys, of how he knew she was his niece, of how Elia had named the boy her son. He told them of the White Wolf and why he'd been sent with him, of how it was Jon who saved his life after he slipped. He could see the confusion and disbelief in their faces, and he sighed and awaited their questions. "Father, these things you say, they can't be true. A dragon, I don't doubt you've seen one. But how could it be, Rhaenys? How could you know it not some trick?" Nym asked. "I stood in the room while she and Jon spoke, while she told him something about a time I spent on Dragonstone, a tale I've told no one. He knew of it, told it as if he had been there, as if she had been there." "Sorcery, some black magic perhaps?" Obara said. "I've been around this world, daughter. I've been to Karth and seen the sorcerers at work. I've seen red priests and shadowbinders. No, this was magic all right, but of a different sort, a sort those others could only dream of being able to possess," he said. And Obara looked at him before nodding. "Then this boy, this Jon Snow, he is a prince?" Tyene asked. "He is a king, and he is your cousin. My sister named him her son. My niece calls him brother, and so he is my nephew, blood of my blood." "My prince, forgive me, but Dorne will not accept this northern king," Daemon said. "The boy is of Dorne, Daemon. He was born in the Tower of Joy in the Prince's Pass. It is he who is responsible for the head and body we carry in that cart. He who sent the body of Lorch back to Dorne." "Lorch is dead?" Obara asked. "He is. Jon killed him himself. One stab for everyone he inflicted on Rhaenys. A brother's justice," Oberyn said, smiling. "Then he is my blood too," Obara said, "as he is mine and mine," Tyrene and Nym added before he looked to Daemon. "I swore an oath to follow you, my prince. If you say he is your blood, my sword is his as it's always been yours." He smiled at them and ate the rest of his meal as the laughing and joking began. Again he called his guards back, and they joined in as they all celebrated the fall of the mountain. As he slept that night, the White Wolf stood sentry, and he awoke to the feeling of his tongue licking his face. The broke their fast, and rode on, and 2 days later he saw a Casterly rock in the distance. He looked to the White Wolf and nodded and watched as it took off heading towards the rock. A part of him was tempted to follow, but in the end they rode past it and continued on to Lannisport itself, arriving just as night was falling. As they rode through the city, the cart behind them carrying the bones of the mountain, he found he cared not about the man. For the first time in years, he wasn't filling his thoughts. Instead, it was of Ellaria he was thinking, of her smile, her face, of her body, and her scent. When he arrived at the house, he saw her and jumped from his horse. "My love, you came back to me," she said, smiling as he kissed her. "Always," he said, and kissed her again. "Father, it's true, he is dead." "Jon said he was," Sorella said, hugging him before walking to the cart. "Jon was here," he said to Ellaria. "He came to tell me you were safe, that you and the girls were on their way back to me." Ellaria said, and he nodded. He watched as Ellaria greeted his daughters each as warmly as she had him. Even Daemon was not allowed to forego a hug from his paramour. He lay in the bath later that night, the water soothing his weary and tired bones. He looked up to see Ellaria carry the plate of fruit and lay it beside him on the edge of the bath. She smirked at him then as she slowly disrobed, his eyes drawn to her body as it always was. Over the years, he'd been with maidens and beauties from Lys to Dorne and beyond, yet none were so beautiful as the woman in front of him. When she walked slowly into the bath, he watched as the water covered her, as it hid her body from his view, and he hated it for daring to do such a thing. She moved towards him, and he felt her legs as they came over his own, felt her heat, and saw her desire in her eyes. "My love," she said, biting his ear, and then she showed him what heaven must be like. They broke their fast alone the next morning, and she told him of Jon's suggestion, and he welcomed it, knowing it would please Sorella so. He sent for his daughter and told her the truth of things, her reaction quite different to his other girls, as she, like him, knew more of such things. "A dragon? A real dragon?" she said excitedly. "Not an ordinary dragon, Sorella. She is your cousin, as is Jon," he said. And she nodded. "So what say you, daughter? Is this something that would please you?" Ellaria asked. "Yes, very much so. I can stay, father?" "I can stay?" she asked, looking to him. "You can now. Come, we must dress. I think we should visit your cousins," he said, and watched her run off to eagerly get ready. "I think you just made her dreams come true." "It wasn't I, my love," he said, kissing Ellaria's neck. They dressed and made ready, setting off within the hour. They rode slowly, though, and he shared the carriage with Ellaria and Sorella, enjoying the peace and the view. It was almost noon when they arrived, and they were met by Jon and the Tyrell boy, both their sisters standing with them, along with a large blonde girl and Lady Dacey. He noticed the clothing they wore, and was surprised to see Dacey dressed in leather armor, which, if anything, only added to her beauty. Prince Oberyn, Lady Ellaria, a most welcome surprise, Dacey said, and he kissed her offered hand. "My lady, it is good to see you," he said, and Ellaria spoke to her as he moved to Jon. "My prince, it is good to see you well," Jon said, and he smiled, noticing the white wolf with 2 pups in the background. "You too, Jon. Perhaps we could speak?" he asked. And Jon nodded. He turned to see his daughters talking to Lady Dacey, and the large, blonde, excited looks on their faces. Before he had a chance to see why, Sorella came beside him. "May I join you when you speak together?" she asked. And he looked to Jon, who nodded. "Of course, my lady. We'd be honored," Jon said. "My love, it seems we've just interrupted some sparring which the girls have asked to take part in. Perhaps you can delay your talk for now," Ellaria said. "I think that's an excellent idea, Jon." "As you say, my prince." He watched as Jon walked to speak to a tall guard who nodded and then walked away. An even larger one coming to speak to Jon and stay then. This was the giant he'd seen before, and up close he was even more impressive. The large double axe on his shoulders, a deadly deterrent to those who wished his nephew harm. They took the lift to the main floors and were led to a courtyard where weapons and armor were laid out. He watched as the blonde girl led his daughters over to the racks, as the Tyrell boy then showed them some more. It was a few moments later that Lord Jaime arrived along with his brother, and Oberyn nodded to them before going to stand with the dwarf. "It's good to see you, my prince. You, too, Lord Tyrion. Lord Jaime," he said, nodding to the taller man. "It seems your daughters wish for a spar. My prince, my lady wife, seems most eager to accommodate," Jaime said with a smirk. "I look forward to seeing it," he said as a servant arrived with wine. He looked to see Lady Jenna and the young blonde girl, Joy, arrive, Balerion following in her footsteps as she ran to Jon and Lady Margaery. Two young blonde boys arrived a second later. By the time the spars were about to start, even the Queen of Thorns and Lady Dacey's cousin and wife and babe had arrived. He waxed surprised as the woman spoke happily with Ilaria, as Sorella spoke with Jon and his sister and Lady Margaery. Turning, he saw his daughters ready themselves, saw Dacey grab a blunted mace, and he grimaced. His daughters may learn a painful lesson here today. Dacey. Jaime was right about one thing. Jon was resilient. For some reason, after he dealt with the revelations that Tyrion had dropped on him, he had bounced back far quicker than she could have imagined. She had seen him laughing with Margaery and Sansa, playing with Joy, and now sparring with Loras and Brienne, though he was absolutely terrible at it. His left hand simply not able to do what his right could. Were it not for both his quickness and the unwillingness of either of his opponents to hit his injured shoulder, Jon would have been defeated in moments. As it was, it took only slightly longer. The one time he managed to get a win was surprisingly using the spear, something Arthur suggested, though he paid for it in the next fight. And had Brienne seen the look she got from Margaery and Sansa when she caught Jon's hand, she'd have ended up spending even more time in her room than she already did. Well done, Jon said with a smile, and bowed out, letting Loras spar with Brienne while he spoke briefly with Arthur before he was fussed over by his sister and Margaery. She watched as Brienne and Loras shared wins, Loras edging her in the end. The girl only seemed to be happy during these times. Still settling in, she had spent most of the first few days with her father, or Jaime, until she had decided to take her aside and speak to her, Lady Dacey. "I'm sorry, I thought no one was here," Brienne said, sitting in the library. "Please, it's Dacey," she said with a smile. "Brienne," the girl said shyly back. "Are you not enjoying yourself here, Brienne?" "Well, no, my lady, no, it's not that. It's just, I'm not used to so many people. I had thought it would be just Jon, Loras, and myself, but with Lady Margaery and Lady Sansa." She knew it then, what it was, why she'd been avoiding Jon and Loras so much. While Jon had been busy dealing with his own things, Loras, while being there for his friend, had been trying to get Brienne to do more with him too. But it was the girls. She felt odd around them, felt like she would be judged more harshly by them, made fun of, and Dacey sighed at the stupidity of these southern rules. Sansa and Margaery would never judge her like she thought they would, but she had no way of knowing that, no way of being certain, and so she hid from it rather than be hurt by it. "You know where I come from. A woman is taught to fight alongside the men. From an early age, I learned how to use a sword or an axe or wield a mace," she said, smiling as the girl looked at her. "I had heard that in the north, the ladies of Bear Island were as fierce as the bears on their sigil," Brienne said, smiling. "Jon, you should spend more time with them, you know, with Jon and Loras, with Sansa and Margaery. They're not how you think they are," she said, looking her in the eye. I know how strange it can be, how hard it can be coming to a new place, but I assure you, Brienne, spend time with them, and you'll enjoy your time here more," she said. And the girl nodded as she walked away. She had gone to Arthur and asked him to start training the girl and been pleased at the difference. While she still was only getting used to being around Sansa and Margaery and still only did so sparingly, she was doing so. They had been sparring today when word came of Prince Oberyn's arrival. A part of her annoyed, as it meant she'd have to delay her own spar for another day. Greeting them, though she found them to be different than the other lords and ladies she'd had to entertain since getting here. Ilaria was witty and seemed to be non-judgmental, something she couldn't say about some of the ladies of the West, though some of that she knew was down to jealousy over her marrying Jaime. The prince was handsome and charming, and knowing he and Jon were on the same side was a great relief. His daughters, on seeing her armor, were amazed she fought, while they weren't completely dismissive. She found their attitude a little grating, and so before she knew it, she was challenging them. "Of course, my lady, we'd be delighted to," the young blonde Taine said sweetly while her sister smirked. They took the lift and she had Loras and Brienne show them to the armor and weapons. By the time they came back ready to start, it seemed word had spread. Jaime, Tyrion, Jenna, the children. Half the Rock had come out to watch. She took her blunted mace and looked to see who she'd face, the oldest Obara standing facing her with a spear. "When you're ready, my lady," Obara said arrogantly. Daisy moved quick and saw the shocked look on the girl's face as she dodged her mace. Obara striking out and missing with her spear. The next strike caught the small round shield the girl held, the power of it rattling her arm. Obara's thrusts grew quicker and more desperate, and Daisy smirked as she moved for the kill. When Obara struck her next blow, Daisy allowed the spear to barely miss, catching the shaft between her arm and side. She pulled the girl close, tapped the shield free with her mace, and swept the girl's legs from under her. Obara fell to the ground disarmed, the spear still lodged between Daisy's arm and side, the shield rolling across the ground. Daisy dropped the spear and placed the mace by the girl's forehead, watching on as she nodded. "Yield?" she asked. "I yield." She helped the girl to her feet and then looked to the other two, who looked at each other and nodded. Both of them stood ready to face her. Tyene held a sword and shield, while Nymeria held 2 daggers, but both stances needed work. Where Obara was crisp and tight, theirs were more loose, and it would be to their cost in a fight such as this. Again she moved quickly, and the girls tried to come at her from the sides, Tyene striking first. She caught the sword hard and watched it fall to the ground, the girl not ready for her strength. With Nymeria, she swung hard and low, forcing the girl to back away, while she took Tyena's shield and forced her out. Turning to a shocked Nymeria, she waited until the girl moved and showed her why daggers were a bad weapon to use. You had to get close, and a mace was a big obstacle to get past. She smirked at the frustration and saw the annoyance grow on the girl's face. A second later, she blocked the thrown knife with her mace, knocking it to the ground. Nymeria moved quickly, trying to use what she thought had been a distraction, but as she got close and stabbed with her knife, Daisy, just like she'd caught the spear shaft, did the same with Nymeria's arm, trapping it by her side. "Yield." She set the mace by the girl's head, her arm held tight by her own. "I yield." She looked up to see Jaime smiling broadly, and the nod she received from Prince Oberyn made her nod back. Jon and the others were clapping as they looked on, and Brienne was looking at her open-mouthed. She moved to walk back when the Dornish knight stepped forward, his hand holding a blunted sword. She raised her eyebrow and he nodded. "Perhaps, my lady, you'd do me the honor," Sir Daemon said. "You really think it an honor to be beaten by a lady," she said to laughs. "By a lady such as yourself, it would be no shame," he said and smiled genuinely. This was a different fight. Daemon had strength where Obara did not, and technique that neither Tyene or Nymeria possessed. His stance was perfect. How he held his sword showed a man who'd spent hours training and honing his craft, but he had foregone a shield, and that was just stupid. Her mace clashed against his sword, and the sound rang around the courtyard. He moved fast, and his strikes were quick, but she'd fought against her husband, and compared to him, Daemon was slow, so she blocked them easily and added more power to her own. She felt the vibrations when her mace caught the sword, saw the small grimaces he made. She made to swing hard, and as he raised his sword to block, she spun and caught him on the other arm. The blow wasn't full on, but it was enough, and as he winced from it, she took his sword, the force of her blow catching him unaware as the blade fell to the ground. She didn't even have to ask him. He bowed his head. "I yield, my lady. The day is yours." She smiled at the cheers from those watching and placed her mace back on the rack as they began to walk inside. She saw Jon walk with Prince Oberyn and one of his daughters, saw Brienne talk to the others. Jenna took Marjorie, Joy and Sansa inside, and Jorah and Lanesi walked with Alaria, who was playing with Gerald. Jenna took Marjorie. As she turned, she saw Jaime walk down towards her, a large smile on his face and a devilish look in his eyes. "You were amazing, my love," he said, kissing her. "Aren't I always?" he japed. "Aye, you are. Now I think I should take you back to our rooms and soothe your weary bones," he said as he looked at her. "My bones are well enough, thank you very much. Besides, we have guests. Well, the guests are being entertained, and if your bones don't need soothing, perhaps I can find some way to reward you for your victory," he said softly as he nibbled on her ear. Fine. Then I'll let you reward me," she said, and he almost grabbed her to drag her inside, her laughter ringing around the courtyard. Ashara. She had thrown up twice on this journey. Whether it was from the sea or from nerves, she couldn't tell, but the closer they got to Lannisport, the more her heart raced. Oberyn was there with his paramour and daughters, and that alone should give her pause. To see Elia's brother again after so long. But it was the thought of seeing Lyanna's son, and what that would mean, which was causing her concern. Not only because of the things she'd seen in the visions, but because of how he may welcome Cregan. Would it be friendly? Would he bear her son ill will? Would he send them away? Arthur's letter suggested not, but still she worried. She knew what the truth of her son may bring, what problems it may cause. She wanted no part in the succession of the North, had no desires for Winterfell or anything the Starks owned. It was never Brandon's wish to be Lord, never his desire to be Warden of the North, and had the worst not happened, then Eddard would have been named over him anyway. "Mother." "We can see it in the distance," Cregan said excitedly as he walked into her cabin. "Can we indeed? I expect you want me to come watch it with you as we dock then," she said with a smile. "I do. Come, Mother, please," he said as he turned to walk back to the deck. She got up and followed and saw him standing there, Lady Melisandre and her two guards almost as excited as he was. She nodded to the woman who smiled at her and took Cregan's hand as Lannisport came into view. The city was larger than she expected, and as she looked to the dock, she was amazed at the ships that were there. They made her own seem like a small rowing boat in comparison. Even Melisandre looked at them with awe. "Mother, look at those," Cregan said, pointing them out. "They're incredible, are they not, son?" she said, and he nodded in agreement. When they docked, Melisandre and her guards took their things and paid a man with a cart to take them to a tavern they could rent rooms in. They would send one of their guards to Casterly Rock to speak to Arthur, and then see what was to happen from there. For now, she was just happy to be on solid ground. While her nervousness hadn't gone away, just being able to walk without the swaying of the ship made her feel somewhat better. They ate and went to their rooms. Cregan disappointed it would be another day or two before he met his cousins. It had been hard to explain it to him, how one would know who he was while the other would not. How he could tell them all he was, Sir Daeron's nephew, but that was all. When he had asked why she had told him that Arthur and his cousin would explain it more, that once he met them, he'd understand, and her son had accepted it, thankfully. She dreamt of him again that night, as she had been doing since she left Starfall to come here, her wild wolf smiling at her in that way of his. She could almost feel his lips on her own, almost reach out and touch him. But then, as always, she saw his hands on his throat, saw him reach for her and try to speak, saw the light go out of his eyes. She woke up, tears streaming from her eyes, and walked to the window, Looking out, she saw the sun rise, and the sight made her close her eyes. She remembered a morning waking on a hill, her love's arms holding her as the sun rose in the sky. She closed her eyes and pictured the black walls in the distance, pictured the banners, and she heard his voice. "I don't care what my father says. I am yours, and you are mine, now and always. Now and always," she said softly as she walked back to the bed. Cregan woke an hour later, and they broke their fast early. She decided to take a walk through the town, and her son was eager to see it all for himself. It was mid-morning when they made their way back to the tavern, and the guard they'd sent to Casterly Rock had returned. The man with him was a giant, and clearly from the north. He looked at her, and then Cregan smiling at her son, who was staring at him as if he was something from a tale. "My lady, Sir Dairon is unable to join us for now. He's busy with some other matters, but he sent me to welcome you and to escort you all to the rock." "I thank you, sir." "Sir Walder, my lady. Sir Walder Aliers, I'm one of John's guards." "You know my cousin?" Cregan asked. "I do, young man. Cregan, isn't it?" he said, smiling at her son. "Yes. How did you know?" "Your uncle told me, my lady. Perhaps you'd like to take your lunch first. It'll take us some time to reach the rock in the carriage." "Carriage?" she asked. "Lord Jamie insisted, my lady," Walder said. They ate their lunch, and she laughed as Walder told her son of his namesake, of the Wolf of the North. How he had crossed blades with the Dragon Knight himself. How he'd risen to be Hand of the King and had ruled the North for many years. She thought about the dangers of what he was saying to her son, but her son cared not about the stories of ruling the North, nor of the tale of being Hand of the King. While he did like the tale of the Hour of the Wolf, he focused instead on the first part. "You really fought the Dragon Knight. Who won?" Cregan asked excitedly. "Aemon." "Oh," her son said sadly. "The Dragon Knight said he'd never fought a better swordsman, though," Walder said, and Cregan smiled. Once they finished their meal, Walder and the guards grabbed their things and Lady Melisandre's, and they set off for Casterly Rock. Arthur. When he saw Oberyn arrive, he looked to Jon, who nodded, allowing him to have Walder shadow him rather than he. He kept in the background then, trying to decide when or if he should approach the prince. Watching the spars, he laughed when Dacey beat Oberyn's former squire. The man was good sword, but you don't face a mace without a shield unless you're using a greatsword. He went to his rooms when Jon and Oberyn headed to his, as he needed time to think. Many years earlier, he had called Oberyn a friend. He and Ashara had played as children in the water gardens. They'd been almost as close as brothers at one time. As time passed and Oberyn and he had spent less time together, he found new and different brothers, one closer than any and a truer brother he'd never found. His meetings with Oberyn were few over the years. The last at Harrenhal had almost ended in violence, though Oberyn knew better than to actually threaten the prince. Still, he had been ready to cut him down if the need should arise, had almost hit him when he spat at his feet, but in the end had simply forced him away from the tent. When news came of what happened in the Red Keep, he had wept for his princess, for her son and daughter. Now many years later, he knew Oberyn would blame him in some way. He was laying on the bed when Jon knocked on the door and entered, and he watched as he took a seat. "Arthur. It's time if you wish. I need to do this, Jon. Do it in my room, with Rhaenys there." "I don't know if we should. What if something goes wrong?" he asked. "Ghost will be close by too. I would join you if you asked, you know that, right?" "I know, but no, this has to be me alone." "As you say, Arthur. There are many people to blame for what happened in the Red Keep. Varys, my grandfather, Tywin, Lorch, and the Mountain. You are not one of them, no matter what Oberyn says," he said, and Arthur smiled at him. They walked to the door of Jon's room, Walder walking with them. Reaching the room, they found Jorah standing there, and John nodded to him before entering, leading him inside. Oberyn was sitting on the bed, playing with Rhaenys. Her chirps sounded happy to him as he looked at them. "Uncle," John said. And Arthur smiled, thankful that they at least were setting things right. "John, it seems your sister is in a playful mood," Oberyn said before he saw him and went silent. "I wish you two to speak, uncle, but know that Arthur is my Kingsguard, as he has always been," John said. And Oberyn never took his eyes off him as he nodded. John leaned down and took the dragon from Oberyn, and as he walked to the table he could hear her chirping as John spoke softly to her. He then smiled at him and Oberyn before walking to the door, leaving the two of them still staring silently at each other. "You should be dead," Oberyn said accusingly. I should, but I'm not," he said back. "Where were you?" "Where I was supposed to be, guarding the king. While she was being killed, you guarded the king. While Aegon was being killed, you guarded the king. While Rhaenys was being killed, you guarded the king," Oberyn said, full of spite and anger. "I did as I would do again, even knowing what happened," he said, and Oberyn jumped to his feet. "You dare call yourself a Dornishman?" he said angrily. "I call myself a Kingsguard. We had two of us to guard the future queen and her son. Then 3 to guard the boy. 3 against how many to guard the last remaining hope for not just the crown, but for everything." "She had one," Oberyn shouted. "One to guard all 3 of them. She had 4, Jaime, Luwin, Barristan, and Jonathor. It was Aerys, listening to Varys, who left her with one, not I, and not Rhaegar," he shouted back. "So that's your excuse? That's supposed to free you from guilt?" "I carry guilt with me always, but not for that. I carry guilt for not doing what Jaime Lannister did, for not putting my blade through Aerys' back, for not killing that crazy fucker years earlier. Had I, then she'd be alive. Aegon, Rhaenys, Rhaegar, and Lyanna would all have lived, and that boy would have grown up with the family he deserved. So yes, I feel guilty and will until the day I die, but for that." He watched as Oberyn reached into his shirt, his face full of rage, and then the dragon roared, or as close to it as she could make it sound. Both of them looked on as she let loose with flame, as the chair caught fire. John raced in a moment later, Walder and Jors with him, and as the 2 men threw water to put out the flames, John spoke to his sister before turning to them. "The 2 of you are behaving like children. I've already told you, Arthur, you are not to blame, and you, uncle, if you wish to quench your thirst for vengeance more, then do so to those who deserve it, to the maesterses who plotted against my family, and the men who wished for their own piece of the crown," John said, and Oberyn looked to him. "Mo, what?" Oberyn asked. "Oberyn, there are things you need to know. We'll speak on it on the morrow. For now, perhaps it's best to let cooler heads prevail," John said, and Oberyn turned to leave. "Arthur, stay!" Jors carried the burned chair from the room, and Walder shooed away the servants who came running, before closing the door so they wouldn't be disturbed. Arthur looked on as John walked to the bed with the dragon in his hands. "Did you have to destroy the chair?" John asked. The dragon chirped back. It was a good way to stop them killing each other, but I did like that chair." More chirps. "Well, it's just as well you're not as large as Balerion then, isn't it? Otherwise I'd never find something I can sit in," John said, laughing. After putting the dragon down, he turned to him, and Arthur thought he was about to be lectured. Since he'd started guarding the boy, he'd noticed at times little expressions that were fully Rhaegar would appear when he was aggravated or annoyed. When he was smiling or happy, he was his mother. Oh, his smile was all Rhaenys and Rhaegar, and for all intents and purposes it was them you'd see. But for Arthur, he saw Lyanna. When he was angry or sad, though he was his father's son, while John, unlike his father, wasn't melancholic by nature, things affected him, and he could brood just as much as Rhaegar did. "How are you feeling?" he asked. and Arthur smiled, seeing them both clearly then. I am well. He's angry. I get that, but thanks to your sister, I think I'll live another day, he said, looking to the dragon. Hopefully more than that. I need you with me, Arthur. I'll speak to him again. You two may never be friends, but I'll speak to him. I thank you, my king, he said as he left. It was the next night the Red Priestess's guard came to the rock. He had wanted to go speak to Ashara himself, but Oberyn was still here, and Jon had insisted he stay with him. That Oberyn needed to see him by his side. So Jon had told him to send Walder to bring them to the rock, and he had counted the hours, and now finally they walked to the other guest wing, and Jon seemed as excited as he was to see them. He saw her as he entered the room, her hair dyed blonde and Cregan standing nervously beside her. Lady Melisandre and her guards basically ignored him, so intent were they at staring at their prince. And Jon nodded for him to greet his sister first. Ash, he said, hugging her tight. Arthur, your hair, she said, chuckling. What of yours? He said back. Cregan, come, give your uncle a hug, Ash said, and his nephew hugged him tight as Jon moved forward. Lady Ashara. It's an honor to finally meet you, Aunt, Jon said, and Arthur saw Ash's eyes glisten at being recognized as such. You too, Your Grace, his sister said, remembering herself. Please, Aunt, it's Jon. Cool, he said. And she nodded. You must be my cousin Cregan, he said, turning to his nephew. I am Jon, Cregan said, and Jon smiled, shaking his hand. Lady Melisandre? An honor, Jon said, turning to the Red Priestess. My prince, it is good to finally see you in the flesh. Myself and my men are at your command. I thank you, my lady, Jon said. I shall see you all settled. I'm sure we have much to discuss, Jon said.